Very complimentary self-introduction there.
So in terms of my background, I mentioned my PhD from Leicester, famous for discovering the remains of Richard III and British soccer. So if you're not interested in famous dead corpses or British soccer, probably best to stay away from Leicester. Just two quick caveats before I start. First of all, coming to this project, pretty new project to myself and obviously new to the field as a political scientist and a historian, more so than a computer scientist. However, I will be collaborating with certain computer scientists, futurologists and philosophers in preparation for my book manuscript to kind of get a better sense, including scientists in residence at CNS, Livermore and Sandia Labs as well. Secondly, these findings are all quite a preliminary stage, so there is obviously quite a bit of scope for amendments and adjustments and revisions, so any kind of feedback or commentary at this stage is obviously very much welcome. I've been told to keep the jargon to a minimum, given the fact that I have a vested interest. I'll be translating some parts of this talk into Chinese for some colleagues in China, so help with that process. Okay, so for this talk, I'll begin by outlining briefly that is an AI primer in terms of grounding the discussion of what we mean by AI, specifically in a military context, so it's better to understand the kind of things that AI is able to do, as well as its limits, especially within the nuclear sphere. Then I'll talk about some of the misperceptions surrounding AI, in large part of some of the popular cultural associations of the technology that tend to frame the discussion around AI into two extremes, either as a kind of utopian force for good or painting dystopian end of humanity scenarios. Next, I'll outline some of my research themes that run through my book and related projects here at CNS. Moving on to the case studies, these will involve some deep dives that actually feature as chapters in my book on the AI cyber security nexus, using AI-enabled technology to hunt for thus far hidden nuclear assets and also autonomous drone swarming. Then I'll finish with some brief discussion on possible future spin-off topics and under-researched topics in the field that hopefully will occupy my time here next year. So to begin with, simply as an AI primer, what do we hear? What actually is military AI, and perhaps more importantly, how is it different from previous generations of defense innovation? The term itself, artificial intelligence, was actually coined at a Dartmouth conference in the 1950s, but obviously the explosion of interest in the field has occurred around in the last sort of 10 years. And this has been largely due to the convergence of four key developments. The exponential growth in computer processing power, expanded data sets, especially those associated with big data analytics, advances in machine learning techniques and algorithms, especially deep neural networks, and fourthly, and perhaps most importantly, the rapid expansion in commercial interest and investment, both public and private, in AI. Now, because of the diverse range of approaches to AI-based research, given that it's also a very much a dual-use topic, there is no universally accepted definition of AI, which has caused quite a bit of confusion when the term itself has been sort of loosely used to make kind of generic claims about its grandiose impact or its revolutionary effects on military affairs. In fact, any task that AI is capable of doing in this day and age is often judged by definition to be revolutionary. So obviously some caution there is required in terms of the very much liberal use of this concept within and outside the security context. AI is generally viewed as a subfield of computer science, more broadly focused on computation problems through search, heuristics, logistics, probability. It also draws heavily from other disciplines, so it's very much multidisciplinary, including mathematics, philosophy, linguistics, psychology, and probably most importantly, neuroscience. AI can be best understood, I'll try here to give kind of a definition, as a universal term for improving the performance of autonomous systems, and to also solve a wide variety of complex tasks, including perception, reasoning and decision-making, learning and knowledge representation, communication, robotics, and human-machine collaboration. And that final one is quite a big piece of my research. In a military context, AI is therefore better thought of as a kind of enabler or force multiplier of an existing range of advanced weapon systems, both conventional and nuclear. Thus, it's probably more akin to electricity, radio, and radar than actual standalone weapons per se, which I'll come to towards the end, but that obviously makes traditional arms control measures for AI a particular problem, and also verification. Conceptually speaking, AI can be categorized into uses at an operational, tactical, and strategic level of warfare. Operational and tactical applications, and these have been more widely discussed given that they exist or they're being developed in the current day. They include autonomy and robotics, especially drone swarming, wargaming, big data-driven modeling, cybersecurity, talent management, logistics planning, forecasting, as well as intelligence gathering and analysis, which is obviously particularly useful in locating and monitoring mobile missiles, submarines, mines, and troop movement. We'll come back to these issues in the case studies. At a strategic level, and this is where it gets more complicated, the distinction between strategic, operational, tactical are not necessarily binary. There's obviously some overlap, i.e. tactical and operational uses of AI can also have strategic effects. So strategic uses of AI include improvements to nuclear C3AI or communications, command and control, and intelligence, which is obviously useful, particularly in cluttered, contested environments. Enhancing target acquisition, tracking and guidance systems. Obviously this is useful for queuing long-range precision munitions. Increasing the speed and scope of decision-making, improving battlefield situational awareness, which again in contested environments such as the Baltic Seas or South China Seas can be particularly useful. In the cyber domain, AI can be force multipliers for both offensive and defensive capabilities. They can be used to infiltrate and uncover network vulnerabilities in defensive operations, or to manipulate, spoof, or destroy digital networks in offensive missions. And finally, they can be used to bolster or enhance nuclear and non-nuclear missile delivery systems, including hypersonic variants. However, while the tactical and operational uses of AI are becoming more and more kind of self-evident, its effects at a strategic level, especially command and control and decision support analysis systems, still remains quite uncertain for now. Okay, so here's a bit of jargon. So in terms of these AI-related concepts and themes, these colourful illustrations simplify or attempt to simplify some of the often used or misused terms and concepts when we talk about AI and how they kind of interact. Especially relevant to this talk is machine learning and autonomy and how that fits in with the general field of artificial intelligence. A basic familiarity of these terms is enough to sort of understand or grasp what follows in this talk. However, if you have a burning interest or trouble sleeping, I've got amassing a pile of AI-related computer science books in my office. Okay, so I call this a Hollywood problem set. It given the hype, and there's quite a bit of hype surrounding AI, it's quite easy for scholars, analysts, policymakers to overstate some of the opportunities and challenges posed by the adoption of AI in the military sphere. While AI might enable major improvements to many areas of warfare, including the nuclear domain, for the foreseeable future, probably the next 5-10 years at least, developments will be more prosaic and theoretical than the common misrepresentation of AI in popular culture, and especially science fiction. Currently, there's a large gap that exists between the reality of what AI is capable of doing and the expectations and fears of policymakers, global defense communities, and especially public opinion. So these super intelligent AI machines that can learn and teach to resist human control, or these Terminator-like killer robots, are not really the type of technology we should be most concerned about. In fact, if this did come to pass, they would be aggressive and offensive given the programming by their human operators. In fact, some of these highly speculative scenarios overshadow more immediate, more pressing issues. Above all, that states may underestimate some of the very pronounced limitations in the current range or generation of AI technology. In particular, its brittleness, opacity, unpredictability, bias, and probably most importantly, vulnerability, especially to subversion and cyber attacks. Now, because of the limitations and risks of the current range of AI, racing blindly down the path towards autonomous weapon systems could have quite dire consequences for nuclear stability. Much of the attention in the literature is focused on cyberspace and the impact here on deterrence and stability. The impact or implications for AI for nuclear stability have thus far been under-researched. Now, it's important to emphasize that a lot of the risks posed by AI and related technology in the nuclear domain today they're not necessarily new threats. That is, AI can be conceptualized more of a manifestation of an established trend in emerging technologies, including the revolutions in accuracy, remote sensing, and obviously cyber. And these revolutions or these trends have been associated with the speed of warfare increasing, the shortening of the decision-making time frame, and the commingling of nuclear and non-nuclear capabilities. And this is something that Paul Bracken at Yale has been talking quite a bit about as well. So my thesis is grounded in four kind of interrelated central arguments. First of all, in isolation, AI has few discernible direct effects on nuclear stability. That is to say, as a standalone capability in isolation of other advanced systems or other advanced weapons, it is unlikely to be a silver bullet or a game-changing capability by itself. Rather, much like cyberspace, it will more likely mutually reinforce the destabilizing effects of existing ranges of advanced weapon systems, thereby increasing the speed of warfare and compressing the decision-making timeframe. Secondly, AI's impact on deterrence, especially deterrence and escalation frameworks and pathways, are more likely to be determined as much, if not more so, by states' perceptions of what AI is able to do, rather than its actual tactical and operational capabilities. So for the foreseeable future, military AI will continue to incorporate a very large degree of human agency or human control or human input, especially in the safety-critical nuclear domain. And thus, it will likely have or exhibit very similar cognitive bias and subjectivity that has been a core part of human foreign policy decision-making since time immemorial. Things like cognitive bias, attribution error, decision-making heuristics, path dependency or seeking shortcuts, as well as dissonance. Therefore, even if an autonomous weapon was not intended to be, or even technically capable of a disarming first strike, for example, the perception alone that this technology was even feasible would elicit distrust between nuclear states or nuclear rivals, and therefore be destabilizing nonetheless. Thirdly, the simultaneous pursuit, quite aggressive pursuit of AI by great powers, especially United States and China, will likely compound the destabilizing effects of AI in this military arena. In the second, also arguably the third nuclear age, consisting of 9 nuclear powers with varying degrees of interests, capabilities, perceptions of their place within the post-Cold War US world order, AI will likely intensify the impact technology is already having on deterrence during peacetime, but also likely to have during crisis and conflict or nuclear brinkmanship between nuclear armed rivals. Finally, and related, against this very inopportune geopolitical backdrop, the perceived benefits of AI-powered weapons, especially AI and autonomy, may prove irresistible to states in order to sustain or capture, in the case of China, perhaps Russia, the technological upper hand vis-a-vis their rivals, i.e. the US. So a key point to hammer home is, in all these areas, these 4 central themes, is that the most pressing risk to nuclear security is the premature adoption of unsafe, unverifiable, and unreliable AI in the context of nuclear weapons, which could obviously have catastrophic implications. The talk doesn't get a lot more optimistic than that, by the way. Okay, so these are 3 overarching research themes that run through my book project, and they illustrate broadly how and why AI applications fuse with advanced strategic non-nuclear weapons. I've given up on the jargon. Might cause or exacerbate escalation risk in future warfare. So to begin with today, there is a multifaceted possible intersections of AI with a broad range of advanced non-nuclear weapons, especially conventional counterforce capabilities that could compromise nuclear weapons, and their attendant support systems. These obviously include things like cyber attacks, precision munitions, anti-satellite and hypersonic weapons. This commingling problem set is further aggravated by quite a recent political willingness, especially the United States, Russia, and potentially China, to use nuclear weapons to respond to conventional attacks that target an adversary's nuclear assets, for example, their early warning systems, command and control facilities, and nuclear launch sites. And this is made explicitly clear in the 2018 US Nuclear Review, Posture Review. More broadly, the introduction of increasingly capable advanced technology into this nuclear realm is already challenging assumptions we have about deterrence, arms control, and crisis stability. So this second theme's related to speed, or the pace of warfare, or the rhythm of warfare. Now, AI introduces a unique means to operate and respond at machine speed or gigahertz speed in the use of military force. Now, military arenas where a premium is placed on autonomy and speed, therefore faster reaction times, such as gathering and analysing intelligence for cueing long-range precision missiles, will likely have an outsized strategic effect. Now, a key point to emphasise here is that these massive increases in the speed of combat could result in situations where the speed itself surpasses commanders' comprehension or ability to comprehend the pace of war, so much so that commanders on the field are unable to effectively control, contain, or worst case scenario, actually terminate events. Imagine, for example, if a crisis such as the Cuban Missile Crisis was truncated from 13 days to a matter of hours or even seconds or minutes. I argue, therefore, that until experts, AI experts, political scientists, unravel some of the more unexplainable and unpredictable features of AI, or the so-called these black box features of machine learning, human error and machine error could compound one another with uncertain and unexpected outcomes. Yet for now at least, it remains self-evident that humans escalate or de-escalate a military situation. However, military technology like AI, and especially in conjunction with AI, that enables weapons to operate and function at high speeds, ranges, lethality, could potentially move a situation more quickly and potentially more worryingly, unintentionally, either accidentally or inadvertently, up the escalation runs to a nuclear level. So AI itself could have a positive or negative implications for nuclear stability. That's not to say that it's completely value neutral. It obviously depends on who's programming it, which states, and they obviously inject their own biases and assumptions. Faster and more reliable AI applications, especially those infused with machine learning algorithms, could enable commanders to make more informed decisions during a crisis. They can improve the safety and reliability of nuclear support systems, strengthen cybersecurity, especially to protect command and control facilities against cyber attacks. And they could also create new and innovative possibilities for arms control and monitoring nuclear stockpiles. They could also enhance things like information flow, situational awareness, and reduce the risk of human error caused by fatigue and repetitive tasks. For example, machine learning can pick up some of the slack in laborious tasks, such as data mining, surveillance, and analytics. Conceptually speaking, therefore, autonomous early warning systems would allow defense planners to identify potential threats faster and more reliably than before, which is arguably a net positive for stability. However, absent human judgment and supervision, together with the inherent brittleness or lack of ability to contextualize that the machine learning algorithms have, the risk of accidental or destabilizing false alarms and risks will likely increase. So, in terms of the ledger here, there's obviously possible benefits and negatives of introducing AI into a military context. At its current stage in development, the confluence of several trends still weighs heavily on the stability detracting or the negative destabilizing side of the ledger. And to recap, these include the inherently destabilizing characteristics of AI, and I refer to this as the perfect storm of instability, my forthcoming article with the Washington Quarterly. The multiple interplay or intersections of AI with nuclear stability, the commingling of nuclear and advanced conventional weapons, and a competitive, geopolitical, multi-polar world order that may entice or impel states to prematurely use augmented weapons. So what would be a real game-changing scenario between these nuclear states? This would be a situation where AI enables a nuclear-armed state to threaten an adversary's second strike retaliation capability, i.e. its ability to respond to a nuclear first strike. Thankfully for now, the technology is not mature enough to represent a credible threat. That's the positive. However, there's no room for complacency. There are many ways these systems could be interfered with at the current stage of AI development. And these immediate risks to stability will more likely come from the manipulation of the information landscape, in which political and military decisions about nuclear weapons and conventional weapons takes place. To be sure, machine learning deepfakes have added a new twist to the risk of miscalculation, misperception, and especially inadvertent escalation risks that originate in cyberspace but have a very real impact in the physical world. And we'll come back to this in the case studies. So these are 3 case studies. I'll begin with hunting for nuclear weapons in the digital age. These are very much associated with counterforce capabilities, and the question I'm looking to unpack here is, how might these AI-enhanced systems impact the survivability of states hitherto reasonably survivable nuclear deterrent forces? Okay, so technologies like machine learning, big data analytics, and sensor technology, broadly associated with the computer revolution since the late 1990s, have already improved the ability of militaries to locate, track, and target a state's nuclear deterrent forces, and without the need to actually use nuclear weapons. Advances in machine learning have the potential to massively improve machine vision and other signaling processing applications. These in turn will likely overcome several long-term technical bottlenecks in the existing iteration of remote sensing and image processing. For example, this can enable states in real time to provide estimates of missiles, velocity, and kill radius. So theoretically, AI-enhanced drone swarms deployed in nuclear ISR missions could be used to enhance the reliability of speed of sensor drones to locate mobile missiles and evade and penetrate enemy defenses. Then, satellite imagery and signal intelligence from drone swarms could queue in real time, which at the moment I believe is not possible, these drones to mop up any remaining retaliatory forces. Now, because of the inherent difficulty at this stage in finding mobile missiles, even modest or incremental improvements towards this end could potentially be a serious game changer. For instance, in the event of a US-China crisis, as long as Beijing maintained its existing pretty rudimentary deception and dispersal tactics in hiding its mobile forces, it is very improbable the US will be able to locate all of China's well-hidden and dispersed land-based missiles, especially given the majority are well-hidden underground and very much within the center of China rather than the more exposed and vulnerable coastal regions. However, were events or advances in AI and related technology, were this confidence to be undermined by these improvements, especially the accuracy and remote sensing of US counterforce capabilities, the implications for crisis ability will be pretty severe. In short, AI applications that make survivable strategic forces less survivable or more vulnerable, or even perceived as such, could have dangerous escalatory effects. And these effects could happen even if the state in possession of these capabilities did not intend to use them in offensive missions. For example, they were solely used for signaling purposes. The effect could still be as destabilizing. This is where it gets a bit more complicated and more controversial in the maritime domain. So we're talking here about undersea deterrence. The extent to which autonomous underwater or overland autonomous systems such as the US double-rigger Sea Hunter could erode the hitherto pretty survivable utility of these stealthy nuclear-powered submarines still remains quite a highly contested issue. Today, significant advances in power, sensing technology, and communications, which is notoriously hard underwater, will be needed before these autonomous systems have a major impact on undersea deterrence. However, even without these advances, improvements which are happening today in computer processing, oceanographic technology, and drone swarming could nonetheless have quite important qualitative implications for both detection and counter-detection operations. These would include things like acoustic jamming, or drones could be used as decoys to create false targets. They could also improve the quietness of submarines and be used to as counter satellite recognition patterns. So the main sort of takeaway message from this case study is that any increase in the vulnerability, or perceived as such, of states' nuclear assets caused by advances in AI and related technologies such as machine learning and potentially quantum computing will very likely undermine some of the central pillars and assumptions that have undergirded the nuclear revolution. So this is a related topic. This deals more directly with AI-empowered or enhanced drone swarming, and specifically the risks these drones pose to escalation risks. Several experts anticipate that increasingly sophisticated AI-enhanced autonomous weapons could soon be deployed for a broad range of ISR and strike missions. That is for defensive, intelligence, surveillance and recon missions, as well as for offensive missions. Drone swarms, in theory, are pretty well suited to conduct preemptive attacks. They're quite expendable, very cheap, very fast, and they can be used in vast volumes. For example, in isolation, a low-cost, or in isolation, a drone would unlikely pose a significant threat to a US F-35 stealth fighter. However, hundreds or thousands of drones in closely coordinated maneuvers could potentially evade and overwhelm even the most sophisticated and multi-layered missile defense system. And this could even be the case in heavily defended regions, such as China's eastern coastal areas. To add to the mix, stealth variants of these systems, together with, and this is where this theme about in conjunction of AI with other technologies could have a magnify or have a force multiplying effect. So these stealth variants, in combination with militarized electronic jammers, cyber offense, could be used to interfere with an adversary's targeted centers and communications, potentially as a prelude for drone swarms flanked by stealth bombers, either manned or unmanned. It is noteworthy that China, US, UK, and France have all developed and are actively testing stealth UAV prototypes. So the key point here is this kind of interoperability or cross-domain warfare, cross-domain operations, together with states' commingled nuclear and non-nuclear assets, creates a de facto escalation framework for nuclear deterrence. That is to say, it enables non-nuclear offensive attacks to occur below the nuclear threshold, which could very easily spiral to a nuclear level if the balloon goes up. Just as a side note here, the deployment of new technology, including cyber and AI, in the nuclear realm, and states' perceptions of the implications from a strategic level of these capabilities will in large part depend on the relative strength or weakness of actors' overall strategic force structure, or the existence of force asymmetries. For example, even if US underwater drones were programmed only to threaten China's non-nuclear attack, that is its conventional attack fleet, Chinese commanders may nonetheless fear that it's relatively small vis-a-vis US and Russia, and pretty incipient sea-based deterrent could be neutralized much more easily by the US Navy in a crisis. For example, we saw the episode in 2016 where China captured a US underwater drone it claimed posed a threat to maritime navigation. The US responded that this act was illegal. This diplomatic crisis we saw evolving, this episode demonstrates some of the escalation risks posed by the introduction of new technology into contested spaces between strategic rivals. So in sum, notwithstanding some of the remaining technical obstacles that are being removed piece by piece at a rapid rate, including the demand for power, which is probably the most pressing technical obstacle, swarms of robotic drones fused with these AI machine learning technology could very likely presage a powerful interplay of range, accuracy, mass coordination in future conflicts. Final case study looks at the cyberspace artificial intelligence security combination or security nexus. And it asks the question of how AI infused with cyber technology could be used to subvert, manipulate, or undermine states' control of their nuclear forces and nuclear assets. Now, several US national security officials believe that AI as force multipliers for both offensive and defensive cyber missions will have a transformative impact on cybersecurity. On the one hand, AI could reduce an actor's vulnerability to cyber attacks. For example, AI, so-called cyber defense tools or counter AI, programmed to recognize changes in patterns in a network or detect anomalies, could form a stronger, more robust defense against cyber intrusions. On the other hand, autonomy itself might increase an actor's vulnerability to cyber attacks, which obviously rely on things like stealth, deception, and stratagem. For example, an adversary could use malware to take control, manipulate, or spoof pattern recognition systems of autonomous weapon systems. This sounds a bit far-fetched, but very recently, I think as of a few weeks ago, it was reported a Chinese team of white hatters successfully, both remotely and wirelessly, hacked into a Tesla's operating system, interfered with the car's brakes, its locks, and other electronic systems, which obviously these kind of attacks in the context of lethal autonomous weapons is quite a worrying prospect. So while these kind of subversions are very much possible with the existing range of cyber offense, so what does actually AI add? Rapid advances in AI, together with increasing degrees of autonomy, could amplify the speed, scale, as well as the making these potential attacks harder to attribute, and accountability is also an issue on these future attacks in cyberspace. And there's been a new phrase coined adversarial AI, which quite a few global defense communities are now focusing on. Now, because of this comes back to the compression or the shortening of the decision-making time frame, because of the intense times pressures that would loom large in any decision to use nuclear weapons, especially where a state maintains a hair trigger or a launch or warning nuclear posture. Cyber attacks against nuclear weapon systems, as in conventional counterforce attacks, would be almost impossible to detect and authenticate, let alone attribute, in the short time available for initiating a nuclear response or a nuclear strike. Good case in point, operators at the US NORAD have less than 3 minutes to assess and confirm initial indications from early warning systems of an incoming attack. Obviously, this kind of compressed time frame could put political leaders under intense pressure to make a decision to escalate a crisis with incomplete and, more importantly, possibly manipulated and false information of a situation. So here's a paradox that has arisen. These new technologies that have emerged, that have been originally designed to improve the reliability and speed of information flow. We're talking here things like hot topics like the 5G networks, machine learning, big data analytics, and increasingly quantum computing. These technologies could paradoxically increase the vulnerability of these networks and undermine clear and reliable information flow between adversaries and also between allies, which is obviously critical for effective deterrence. This is called the capabilities of vulnerability paradox. More bad news. It is now thought possible that these cyber attacks, for example, spoofing, hacking, manipulation, digital jamming, are now able to directly infiltrate states' nuclear weapon systems, threaten the integrity of their communications, and most worryingly, possibly unbeknown to the target of the attack, take control of its nuclear weapon systems, which is a scary prospect alone, especially in the context of newer, perhaps less stable nuclear states who have placed a less of an emphasis on developing robust C2 command structures, for example, Pakistan, India, North Korea. This problem set is complicated further by the absence of an agreed framework or normative structure of what actually constitutes escalative behavior in cyberspace. There's obviously slightly higher up the sophistication ladder. There's, for now, not even an agreed definition of what constitutes a cyber attack, or even what a cyber war would actually look like. So to illustrate some of these potential AI cyber capabilities and these new pathways I've spoken about for escalation, especially accidental or inadvertent escalation, which is a big part of my focus of my research. In the case of spoofing, we can see from this fictional scenario, State A launches a malicious cyber attack to spoof State B's autonomous sensors or its automated target recognition systems in such a way the system itself is forward into interpreting a civilian object, for example, a commercial airliner, as a military target, thus escalating a situation on a false premise that would very unlikely fool the human eye. There's been a recent case of machine learning algorithms being fooled into confusing a helicopter with a machine gun and like examples, which again shows you how brittle and vulnerable these systems are to a manipulation. So in short, the kind of failure to fully comprehend or anticipate the consequences, the complexity, uncertainties surrounding the interplay of human and machine interactions in cyberspace could result in confusion and accidental escalation all the way up to the strategic or nuclear level of conflict. In this second example, this illustrates how deepfake technology in a competitive strategic environment could easily create unprovoked or accidental escalation. To illustrate these dynamics, in an effort to incite conflict between two rivals, State A hires proxy hackers or terrorists to use an AI machine learning technique called generative adversarial networks or GANs to launch a deepfake video or audio material that depicts the senior military commanders of State B conspiring to launch a preemptive strike on state C. Then this deepfake video or audio footage is then leaked into state C's AI-supported networks, which is used for collecting and analysing intelligence, thus provoking state C to escalate to a nuclear level. And obviously state B responds in kind, and inadvertent escalation ensues. In this scenario, even if early warning systems were quick enough to detect an attack such as this, heightened levels of uncertainty and tension caused by an alert could very likely impel the receiver of an attack to put its nuclear weapons on high alert status or launch or warning. So even if these early warning systems could detect such an attack, the high alert status and the compressed decision-making time frame could still produce inadvertent escalation. Furthermore, the current undeveloped state of counter AI or counter or defensive measures to mitigate or manage some of these risks. I read a report yesterday that only 1% of global AI spending is actually spent on securing some of these facilities or researching counter AI. Also, there's a lack of other fail-safe mechanisms, both in artificial intelligence and cyberspace, to mitigate these risks. For example, circuit breakers, fire breaks, and other off-ramps that could be used to de-escalate the situation. And these things will likely compound the escalation risks that this fictional scenario highlights. Just to leave you with some future research puzzles and areas that I'm currently researching or plan to research, just to highlight, will AI in a strategic setting be destabilizing or stabilizing, and what are the risks and trade-offs? Or pre-delegating is obviously kind of at a theoretical level, pre-delegating military force or automating escalation were it feasibly possible to machines. And also be looking at the last comment of in what ways might AI increase the potential for asymmetrical conflict between great powers, especially in the East Asia context. Leave the talk there. Thank you for your attention. Thank you.